Good morning. Good morning, everyone. Thank you very much for joining, for spending 1 hour and a half of this morning and this busy time with us, with the webinar. Now we are almost finishing the second month, or well, we are through the second month of the quarantine, and all of the COVID-related business issues have been discussed a lot in various fora. But what we saw is that, and we ourselves, we did a lot of webinars and a lot of information sessions in Lithuania on various business issues, on various business law issues. But we saw that information maybe a little bit is lacking on these issues in English. And the business community of people investors who have started the business here and who are thriving in the business here is actually very large and very important. So we thought we would fill this gap, and we will try to fill this gap by this English language webinar and it will have two basic blocks. First, we will discuss law, and we will discuss the government measures to support the business. We will discuss the taxation issues, including some supports for the business. Then we will discuss regulatory issues which are relevant for various businesses in the current situation. And then we will have a separate block, and we have a guest of honor for the second block, Kai Schukowski. Of course, I think most of you know Kai as the Director General of Kempinski in Vilius, and very experienced businessman, having experience in different countries. And we will discuss with him his experience as an investor or as a representative of the investor in the country, and how he sees it and how he sees the way forward. And then we will, of course, have time for Q&A. So a little bit of a housekeeping information. You do see in your live stream monitor, in your screen, you see a field for the chat. Please use it to ask your questions. And then I, as a moderator, will try to ask the question to the speaker who is the most relevant, or whom you address that question to. I encourage you to ask those questions because it's really, we have some idea of what might be interesting, but of course the best idea of what is interesting is with you. So this is one thing. Another thing is we will start with just presentation and then discussion with Kai. So the Q&A will be the kind of final part. So please be patient for the questions, and we won't forget them. We will definitely try to answer them. Finally, if you think you would like to discuss the questions personally, or if this is your personal issue of your company, please feel free to contact any of the speakers on our side, on TGS Baltic side, and we will be happy to respond personally and to help the way we can. Okay, so without further ado, I'm really looking forward to the next 90 or 85 minutes. And we will start with the government support measures. And these are important because, of course, it's needless to say that the quarantine and the COVID situation is affecting business very heavily. Of course, different businesses in a different way. Some businesses are completely stopped, others are affected. And the Lithuanian government, as all the governments in Europe, and not only in Europe, is providing certain measures. Of course, there are issues with them, but still, I think it's useful to know what they are and how they could be used, because there are some things that can be used and some things that will become available very soon. So my colleague, Eglė Neverbickienė. Eglė is a very experienced attorney. She is working with banking and finance, and she has a lot of experience in disputes also. So she is really close to the business, and she prepared a presentation on the government measures for support of the business. Eglė, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Vilius. Hello, so I'm Eglė Neverbickienė, Senior Associate at TGS Baltic, and I would like to quickly introduce you to financial assistance measures available for businesses. The measures are as follows: compensation of interest, loans for payable invoices, loans for businesses most affected by COVID, individual and portfolio guarantees, loans from alternative financiers, and aid for business fund. The compensation of interest is available for SMEs only, so the companies having not more than 250 employees. The compensation of interest is the interest is compensated by Invega, paying 100% of the interest of the loan or leasing directly to financial institutions. Deadline for submission of application is 31st of December. The main conditions are as follows. So monthly payment of the leasing or the loan shall be deferred for at least 6 months, starting from the beginning of the quarantine. Interest on all types of loans and leasing may be compensated. An application is to be submitted directly to Invega. Interest is to be transferred directly to the financial institution and not to the client. And at the moment, an amount of almost 5 million euros has been paid out to the business. The second measure is loans for payable invoices, is available for SMEs only. Loans are granted by Invega directly, and 1.4 million out of 15 million have been used already. So this measure is for suppliers whose invoices have not been paid or have been paid only partially. The main conditions: the buyer is in the list of the enterprises affected by COVID. VAT invoices issued for the quarantine period up to 31st March are uploaded to the Smart Tax Administration system. The company, the enterprise supplier, must have maintained 50% of its employees, must have an average of better credit rating, has not been included in the list of long-term debtors, must have submitted financial statements for the years 2018-2019, no bankruptcy or restructuring, and was not regarded as an undertaking in difficulty in 2019. The supplier and the buyer must not belong to the same group of undertakings, and the minimum loan amount is 500 euros, the maximum 500,000 euros. The next measure is loans for businesses most affected by COVID. This measure is available for SMEs only. Loans are granted by FinB and Šiaulių bankas at the moment, and 6.7 million out of 50 million are used. Loans are provided without security, and the loan amount is determined by necessary cost: payroll, utility, lease, logistics, communication, and etc. The loan amount is set by the financial institution, and this measure will be available until 31st of July, and the loan granted not for a period not exceeding 36 months. During the quarantine period, in order to be available for this measure, the enterprise shall have maintained 50% of its employees, no bankruptcy and restructuring, was not regarded as an undertaking in difficulty, the turnover decreased by 30% due to COVID, and meets the criteria of a reliable taxpayer. The maximum loan amount is 1 million euros, and the fixed preferential interest rate is applicable, which is at the moment very low. The next measure is individual and portfolio guarantees. Individual guarantees are available to all enterprises, and for new loans, financial lease contracts, and export guarantees. The financial institution have to be addressed first, and up to 80% of the loan or leasing amount will be guaranteed, or up to 90% if the export guarantee is issued. The minimum amount of the guarantee is 5,000 euros, and maximum amount for SMEs operating up to 3 years is 750,000 euros. For other companies and also for big companies, it's 1.5 million euros. The portfolio guarantees are available for all enterprises whose turnover decreased by 40%. Financial flows are insufficient to cover their liabilities. the value of critical liquidity is below 1, no bankruptcy and restructuring, and not an undertaking in difficulty in 2019. These guarantees will be granted for new loans or existing liabilities restructured during the quarantine. It shall be noted that interest for these loans or leasing may not increase and other conditions may not change. The following actions are prohibited after this guarantee is granted. So the payment of dividends, decrease of capital, buyback, repayment or granting of loans to the shareholders or related persons. As you see, the guarantee fee is quite low, and as also in the case of individual guarantees, the guarantee amount is 80%. The next measure, loans from alternative financiers, is available for SMEs only. Loans are granted at the moment by Inviga through crowdfunding platform FinB, and also will be granted through alternative financiers. At the moment, only Novity Finance provides such loans. The main conditions: 25,000 euro per loan and up to 100% of the loan amount can be financed from the funds of Aviete, which is granted by FinB. Purpose of the loan: financing of investment working capital, except for refinancing, financial activities, and purchase of residential properties. No more than 2 loans within 6 months, and maximum loan duration up to 12 months. This means up to 1 year. The loans granted by alternative financiers until the 1st of December. The purpose may be to finance also the refinancing of the loans if the financing conditions for existing borrowers are improved and not worsened, and financing can be provided in the form of loan, factoring, or financial lease with a maximum amount of 200,000 euros. The next measure, still not available yet, but to be available, is Aid for Businesses Fund. This fund will provide liquidity for medium-sized and large companies, increase possibilities of obtaining financing, and help business to recover after the crisis more quickly. The fund will purchase equities, purchase bond and convertible bonds, grant loans, and it's intended to use the money of the fund only in cases where there are no other possibilities of attracting required funds in other ways, and no possibilities to use the measures discussed before. The fund is scheduled to start operating from the 1st May, and we all and the businesses are waiting for this fund. So if your business does not qualify for the financial measures by Inviga, then perhaps the payment moratorium could help you. And the payment moratorium means that the financial institutions will postpone payments of loans for enterprises up to 6 months, not changing other contractual terms of these contracts. And the moratorium is applicable to business loans amounting up to 5 million per group of undertakings. Moratorium not applicable to agreements without a fixed repayment schedule, and the client subject to postponement must meet the following criteria: no significant delay in payments to financial institutions, no insolvency, no restructuring. The equity capital for the year 2019 shall be positive. Upon introduction of the moratorium and 6 months thereafter, without the consent of the financial institution, payments of the funds to shareholder or related persons, including dividends also, are prohibited. The moratorium entered into force on 24th of April and will remain in force until the 1st of July 2020. This was a brief overview over the measures available to the businesses, which will help them to recover more quickly and support them in these difficult times. So I'm back to Vilius again.
Thank you, Eglė. Thank you. Really impressive amount of information in such a short time. And of course, we will be sharing this content with you later. So if you didn't note everything, of course, you can also tune in for video. We will be posting it online, but also this the information will be available from TGS Baltic. So thanks a lot, Eglė. Now, next speaker is Robertas Degesys. Robertas is partner at TGS Baltic, and Robertas is tax specialist, and he will run through also very quickly the taxation measures that have been made available by the government in this time. Robertas, please.
Thank you, Vilius.
So the presentation is not really ruling.
Yes, but
we don't see full screen, Robertas. If you could.
Yes, I'm trying to push it a bit. Oh. Okay, so good morning. As it was introduced, today I'm going to make a brief presentation of tax relief measures which are applicable to business in the context of COVID-19. And as you probably know, that the basic purpose of such measures is, first of all, to improve the cash flows for the business, because that is what is the best and biggest benefit is. So in these terms, I would say the tax relief measures were quite effective in Lithuania compared to other measures. If we compare financial aid or subsidies to the employees, where we had, let's say, a lot of announcements and rules adopted, but these were not always that easily implemented in real life, and which I think is a major concern for the businesses. So what tax relief measures specifically we have today available? First of all, we have no default interest for overdue tax debts. And just to put that in a simple human language, not in legalistic terms, that would mean that all the businesses, well, I would say not all, we'll talk later on which are those, but the qualifying businesses and companies are allowed to postpone their tax payments for a certain period of time. The second measure is that all the tax recovery, meaning that recovery of tax debts, are put on hold. So meaning, again, something, where let's say all the companies receiving some sort of like tax break. Third measure is interest-free tax loans, and we will see when these are needed, because it's not like on immediate terms. And later we will also touch a little bit on old, so to speak, old tax loans that were taken in the previous periods, and what additional benefits these loans can grant today. So we will see that there could be no interest on such old loans, or just the terms of them can be changed. So first of all, talking about no default interest measure, as I mentioned, it means that basically the companies that qualify for this measure, they are allowed not to pay tax for the period from the 16th of March and until the quarantine ends, and then additional for 2 months. So for that period, how to say, tax break is announced. What tax break covers, basically it covers taxes and also social security contributions, as well as compulsory health insurance contributions. Just to understand what we're comparing and what is the benefit, imagine that there would be no such measure, and company simply is not paying taxes because it does not have sufficient funds. So normally the rate of default interest would be 0.0% per day, which is approximately 10% per year. So basically this is what the government is giving up in this situation. And of course, as I will be talking later, they are refusing for recovery of unpaid taxes. Then, how to make it work in real life? So the rule is quite simple. If your company is in the list of so-called affected companies, enterprises, and that list is issued by by the tax authorities. So then that tax relief is available to you automatically, and no additional action is needed. It's just given for you. If your company is not in that list, but your company still suffered negative consequences or implications, then you may apply to the tax authorities and ask that this measure would be applicable to you. And based on the practices we see, it is rather easily attainable. So it should not be a big issue. And at this point of time, they're accepting these applications and not asking for some additional documents in most cases, although they have such a right to return after they review, let's say, your application and to ask for such documents. So this is really something, like a tax break, and I think as far as we know from our clients, that worked quite well. The second measure, which I already a bit touched, is like no tax recovery, meaning that again, when we're talking about the, let's say, tax debts that occurred in the period indicated, then that recovery will not be initiated or will be suspended. And again, the procedure is quite similar to the above mentioned, that the companies that are in the list issued by the tax authorities, then they can apply for that, not apply, but just they avail from that benefit automatically. And the companies that are not in the list, they have to do it by filing the application. Yes, and if we're talking about a recovery of old tax debts, not relating to that period when the quarantine was announced, but from the past, so these debts can also, the recovery of these debts can also be suspended, but then for that we still need to file a request, an application, irrespective of whether the company is on the list or not. Then what is interesting, remember I mentioned to you that the tax break applies from the 16th March and then until the quarantine ends, and plus 2 additional months. So your natural question would be, let's say, what happens next? If we now can measure that, let's say it happens so that on 11th of May, the quarantine will end, then we have 2 additional months, and the time flies fast. So on 11th of July, that would be necessary to pay all the tax debt you accumulated until then. So probably that could be not possible for everyone, knowing that implications of this crisis could take much longer. So then the next measure would be quite relevant, and this is tax loan. And basically, it is an interest-free tax loan. So again, something what government is giving us. And in this situation, actually, both companies on the list of state tax authorities and those companies that are not on that list, they will have to file the request for such tax loans to be made. The request form is rather simplified, and no additional documents at the submission are requested, which makes things rather simple. The period for which you can ask for that loan to be granted is for taxes administered by the tax authorities is up to 4 years, and for social security taxes it's up to 1 year. But no matter what our wishes is, and of course everybody wants that term to be as long as possible, the reality is that we have to always measure, and evaluate circumstances realistically, because ultimately the decision will be made by the relevant authorities on how long that tax loan could be. And just a few words about old tax loans. Of course, it's probably maybe not for everyone relevant. It's just for those companies that had some financial difficulties in the past and concluded such agreements. So then again, they will have some additional benefits, saying that for these old loans, there will be again no interest for the tax break period. But again, this applicable is again a specific qualification only for the companies on the list issued by the state tax authorities. And similarly, it's also possible to change the terms of all tax loans. So meaning that you can ask to change the installments, so you can change the term. And again, this then
Thank you, Robertas. Thank you. And clearly, it seems like the tax measures are faster to implement for the state. And maybe it's not really surprising, because this is not something new, really. The state is simply revising the payment terms and other conditions for paying the taxes. Well, with the business support, they need to come up with new mechanisms. And of course, the old ones, they would come faster, but well, life is life. We need to face what we have and use as we can.
I can add just a few comments.
There will be some questions also for Robertas on taxation, but we'll take that a bit later. Now I would like to move to Vytautas. Vytautas Šilinskas is the most active member of the COVID task force in TGS Baltic. And also Vytautas is recently nominated a Rising Star by the reputable Rising Star in the Lithuanian market by a reputable international catalog, Legal 500. So Really interesting to hear from you, Vytautas, and please tell us about some other regulatory and labor and other regulatory issues that arise for businesses and how can they be addressed.
Okay, hello everybody. Just give me one moment to start my presentation.
It's up, it's okay.
You can see it? Okay, good. So thank you, Eglė and Robertas, for covering taxes and financial opportunities. I'm trying to cover the rest of the measures that are currently proposed by the government and measures that we can take as a business. So can you see correctly the presentation?
No, we see the cover.
Right. One moment. Something is wrong here.
Well, the webinars are a special thing this way, you know. You never know when the techniques are gonna fail, but we'll be back. Maybe you should try.
Can you see it? Can you see it better now? Can you see it better now, everybody?
No, but we can see, Vytautai, what we can see. Oh, now we can see. Yes, now you.
Good. So now it's working. Okay, thank you. So the first thing is with the employees, right? What can we do with them? Because it's basically, in most cases, the biggest cost line. So first thing is layoffs. I'm not telling that you should do this first thing, but it comes into mind, right? My advice here is to be careful, because there are additional requirements, as you heard from Eglė, to keep at least 50% of your employees. And if you do that, there's a valid reason for terminations, but be careful to follow procedures strictly, because in Lithuania, costs are high of illegal dismissal. That could cost you up to 18 months of salary per employee if, well, court decides that you have not followed the procedures. Then sick leave. This was greatly extended, and a lot of people has used and are still using by the government. Because, well, schools and kindergartens were closed. So government allowed for people to take sick leave to take care of their children if they cannot work remotely. So this is a measure that people are using and should be using, continue using. Part-time work. People, well, both parties are allowed to agree on part-time work, and this reduces the salary of the employee, of course. There's also a possibility, if we follow the procedures, to dismiss the employee if he refuses our proposal of part-time work, but we have to follow the procedures. So paid and unpaid annual leave. There were discussions that employees could not refuse employers' offer to take the paid annual leave, but this is not currently in force. So we still have to agree on this. Also, there were a lot of speculations that sanctions will be applied to businesses who uses unpaid leave, but this was not included in final drafts of the law. So this is still an option, but an employee has to agree with that, and it's unlikely that people would agree with it. Work on demand. There's interesting option that we are discussing internally, and that we think that it is possible to agree on work on demand, meaning that we do not have a high number of fixed hours and we call the person to work when we need it. But please discuss with your lawyer and experienced lawyer, because there are risks involved in this. And I will not go in detail, but there's option to consider. And the last and probably the most known is downtime, during which we can pay only a minimum wage and apply for wage subsidy. I'll go in more detail about wage subsidy. This applies for both full downtime and partial downtime, and we can get up to 90%, but not more than minimum wage if we want, or we can choose to get 70%, but up to 910 euros. as I have calculated, it depends how much you pay during the downtime. You can pay more than minimum wage, and the government compensates more. If you pay less than 867 euros, you should apply to 90%, if more to 70%. There's one important thing to know, that the law says that the person will lose his right to sick leave if you include him or her on downtime and pay downtime subsidy. So please be aware of that, because although the law is strict, our institutions tells that, well, if you properly account your documents and you exclude those people who are on sick leave, they are going to continue to pay the sick leave. So if you exclude people who are on sick leave from your order on downtime, exclude from accounting documents, and do not pay them salary during their sick leave, they will continue to get sick leave, which is better both to the employee and to the employer. One more thing not to forget, that you'll have to keep, if you apply to this measure, you will have to keep your employees at least for 3 months after the quarantine, and, well, at least 50% of those employees for 3 months. Actions are simple. You issue an order on downtime. Probably most of you have done this already. You notice the employees. You should not forget to notice them that their personal data will be transferred to public authorities. You notice State Labor Department and apply for the subsidy. There's as well a subsidy for self-employed people. The amount is fixed amount of 257 euros. I won't go in detail into this. Other announced measures, rent subsidy, because, well, while the wage subsidy is working and the government has paid 12 million euros under this measure. I know that there are applications provided for about 20 million euros for the March, and they are still processing them. Applications can still be provided for March until the end of this month. So you should do this if you haven't done. But there are other important planned measures. First and foremost is the rent subsidy. Draft rules were prepared only on Tuesday. I will go in detail later on. Then there's additional employment subsidies, which were announced yesterday, just yesterday evening. I will briefly go through them as well. And the industry-specific measures, agriculture, transport, and culture sectors are covered. So rent subsidy. The government currently plans to spend 100 million euros, but they say that if there will be more applications, they are going to increase this amount. The issue is that, well, not the issue. The government plans to compensate up to 50% of your rent. Well, they will look into what was the rent in February, and subsidy would be maximum up to 50% of this amount. But the landlord has to provide you at least 30% of discount. So negotiations will be necessary here. And there is a problem here, at least I see a problem, because if the landlord has provided rent-free period during the quarantine, no subsidy will be paid, at least following the current draft. Then there's additional requirements that companies have to comply with. So first, that the business has to be forbidden during the quarantine and the business was not operating. Again, I see a problem here because some businesses were operating at really low levels. Let's say the business is operating at 10% of capacity. So under current draft, this business would not get the compensation. Again, we see this problem. I have discussed this publicly, criticized, and I was approached by Vice Minister and asked to provide our comments to their draft, which we did yesterday. So we hope that they will fix these problems because the government is aware of them. So again, the next is that the company was not in a financial difficulty, the same as for the financing measures, which were discussed by Eglė. Currently, although there were discussions, currently this applies to big businesses as well, not only to small and medium businesses. And the requirement is only that the company had less income than 50 million and has less balance property than 42 million euros. So really big companies can apply as well. There's additional requirement that the rent agreement has to be registered with the real property register at the moment of application. So you could still register your agreement if you haven't, and I suggest doing so. We propose to remove this requirement because we are aware that some tenants have not registered their agreements, but you can still do this. This compensation will be paid up to during the quarantine and up to 60 days after it, and applications will be processed as well by Invega. Additional employment subsidies. These were announced only yesterday evening, so I will just go briefly through them and won't go into detail. But first is that they promised additional downtime wage subsidy to extend it after the quarantine. And there will be two lists of companies. One list is discussed by Robertas, the list of companies that can get tax postponement, and other list will be made by the ministry and will include potential growth companies, which will get a higher compensation. Then there was announced subsidy for supported workplace up to almost 19,000 euros per workplace, but this applies to only certain cases. In case you hire a long-term unemployed person, disabled person, and other supported persons. Apprenticeship support. This one is interesting because you can. Government encourages you to teach people new skills, and they are planning to compensate part of the salary not only of the apprentice but of the mentor as well. Then there will be additional payouts. This is, as far as I see, is preparation for the upcoming election in the autumn, because they are making something similar to helicopter money. The government is going to make a single payout to all the senior citizens, disabled persons, and widowers of 200 euros. Not currently; it is a little bit postponed, and they are going to pay 200 euros per month to unemployed people. 42 euros to the unemployed people who gets the unemployment benefit. And as well, there will be more spending through welfare programs. They are planning to reduce the requirements and increase the payments. There are announced and planned industry-specific measures. I won't go into detail of these, but well, contact us if you need more information. But the government plans to provide subsidies to food processing businesses up to 160 million, to provide financial support to farmers, compensate their income of loss due to drought, and increase spending for other programs. 5 million euros were announced to small and medium businesses in transport sector, and 2 million euros support to cinema industry, as well 2.5 million euros to workers working in culture sector. So that's basically it, and I guess it covers most of the current and planned measures. We will not telling that because we are not covering all planned measures because there are many proposals, but we have covered most interesting and most important ones. Thank you.
Vytautai, thank you very much. Really, really interesting, and I'm still too tempted, so I'll ask you one question. This vice minister writing to you. So So tell us, I mean, this sounds really beautiful. I mean, you wrote a LinkedIn article, yeah? And then she reacted based on that and asked for your comments officially, yeah?
Yeah, I made the post in the evening, and she contacted me early in the morning, 6 a.m., asking to provide us as a law firm our suggestions, which we did with colleagues, and we hope that they will, well, fix their problems. I really appreciate that, because I see that they are putting a lot of effort to make this as best as possible during this short period of time that they have.
Yeah, it's really reassuring that they care. That's exactly, that's also my takeaway. Okay, so Vytautas, maybe you can stop sharing your screen, and now we can move to a discussion with Kai. And Kai is leading Kempinski in Vilnius, and of course we know that also Kai has a lot of experience in other countries and has been very successful business leader in also other countries. So Kai, your impressions and your thoughts are really appreciated. So maybe you can start by brief share of your thoughts, and then I have a number of questions.
Sure. Well, labas rytas, good morning, everybody. Nice to be here with you. Actually, I'm coming from within the hotel, but I just wanted to put out the facade in all its glory, which hopefully we'll be seeing very soon again. And hope to have you all back for social closing rather than distancing, I suppose. But yeah, thank you for the previous speaker. Very, very good content and insights. And also, Vilius, thanks for putting this together. I think important to share this to the English-speaking community to see really what's going on in the country, because as we heard, it's changing day by day, very dynamic. So it's important to keep these things up and running, definitely. So yeah, I mean, just a brief update from our industry. Obviously, you all read the news to see what's happening. We are definitely very much affected in our part of the industry globally. Hospitality, tourism, travel, very, very much impacted. I don't know how familiar you are with STR. Is basically one of the biggest global aggregator of data for hotel industry. They're tracking occupancy rates and so on. And when you look at these numbers, I mean, they've set themselves. I mean, basically the times we're in are worse than 9/11 and the financial crisis combined. So the global impact is felt so much. That is really a complete reset of where we were. They even forecasting, projecting a return to 2019 levels only to be taking place sometime in 2022. So it will really take a long time to come back. And yeah, it looks anything but positive, but well, here we are and we have to deal with it. Obviously, there is some light at the end of the tunnel. I suppose, the gradual opening up of restrictions and so on is a very good sign. Last Monday when I was walking around the city, my heart was jumping, seeing cafes open and people out and about. I think these are, obviously small signals, but it's at least starting to stimulate the local economy, which is a very good thing. Now, at the global scale, definitely, we're very much subject to tourists, right? I mean, we are a hotel operator, not just a restaurant. So really, very, very much depend on tourists coming to Lithuania, Vilnius in particular in our case. So we are really hoping forward and looking forward to the reopening of the borders, of the air traffic, airspace, and I hope it will be a bit more coordinated manner than the closing, because I think we can all agree the closing was completely erratic, somewhere faster, somewhere later, somewhere just smiling while the others were already on lockdown. So it was completely a mess, especially within the Schengen zone. So I hope that the reopening will be a bit more coordinated out of Schengen, out of Brussels, that we have a bit more clarity on, what is the way forward. Because I think the biggest problem people have is uncertainty. You speak to people now, I said, when are you going to travel again? Some people are very bullish. They say, I'm going to go the first flight in June. Some are more conservative. They say, I will wait until 2021, because there is no clarity. When is it safe to go and so on? So I hope that this will be a bit more regulated. I think it's good, as I understand, across the Baltics, the prime ministers are discussing to, at least within the Baltics, start to open up and ease the border flow. So that will help, domestic and cross, Baltic traffic. But again, we are more dependent on European and even global traffic, though understanding that, Chinese market, American market, of course, we won't be seeing any time until next year. That's for certain. but I think at least within Europe, hopefully we can see some rebounds. I think a positive fact of all of this, and I really must give credit to Lithuanian government and authorities, I think they acted very quick and swiftly. When everything happened here so fast, I spoke to my colleagues, friends, and family in Berlin, where I'm from, and they were laughing at me and saying, "What are you guys overreacting? It's just a little virus. It's a cold going around." And here they were really already putting strict measures in place. Now, in hindsight, I think we can all agree that this was really, really exemplary behavior, and I think this is probably also one of the reasons why the numbers are so low as they are. And it might actually play into our benefit to position us as one of the safer places to go to anytime soon. Because, when people associate Italy, Spain, France, you have this connotation of maybe we want to wait a little bit before we go back there. I think when people look towards Eastern Europe in general, I think overall the numbers are quite low. That might be something that people feel more likely to come as a first step. I think also in terms of relief packages, they were very fast and swift. We heard all the measures in place. I think definitely, tremendous help was done. And again, considering that the country itself, compared to other Western countries like Germany, of course, it's nice that they pay 80%. They have the short work for all the workers and so on. Definitely deeper reserves in a way. But I think for such a smaller country who has gradually invested a lot in the infrastructure over the years, I think they've done a lot to stimulate. Now, our concern in our industry particularly is, of course, the continuation of this, because so far, and I'm happy what Vytautas just shared, that there seems to be talks to continue this after the lockdown, because previously it was kind of ending with the end of lockdown, quarantine period, and it all sounds nice to say the lockdown is over, but in reality, I think that's when we transition from the health crisis to the financial crisis. Because that's going to really start hitting once you have 100% payroll on your books, but 5% revenue. So the math doesn't work out, and then you have the mass layoffs and exodus. So I think if they continue the stimulus package beyond that date, I think that would be very, very good. So I'm happy to hear this. And I think it will challenge all our thinking, the way we conducted our business. In our industry, we have to really look at every single way how we do business. A buffet in the past where 200 people grab the same spoon to take their scrambled eggs in the morning. I don't think these things are going to fly anymore. So we have to rethink our business model, which I think might be a good case also, considering hygiene measures. How can we do things differently? It's definitely very much what was already, I think, Lithuania in many ways at the forefront of digital transformation. For us in the hospitality industry, we're always a bit behind. So I think it's the final push to really also challenge the way we communicate ourselves to the outside world, to become much more digital, advanced in many ways, to obviously keep that distancing and just make things more seamless. So, it has certain benefits, I suppose. Of course, it's painful. You said it yourself. I mean, layoffs and reduction of manning are inevitable in the industry. I think we want to try to minimize it as much as possible to get through it all together. But there will be definitely, painful measures to be taken, but it will allow us to get through this and hopefully then reopen in previous glory, as I said. But tough times call for tough measures, but ultimately I do believe there is a light at the end of the tunnel, and hopefully soon we'll have the worst behind us.
Great, Kai. Thank you for this initial insight. But a little bit taking from what you said, and Kempinski is operating around the world.
Sure.
So, and obviously, it's also, I think, Lithuania and the Baltics generally, and maybe even Eastern Europe, has not had so many COVID cases, which is nice. But then, if we move to Sweden, this is always in everybody's mind. Okay, so Sweden didn't lock down, and how is Kempinski doing in Sweden first, and what do you think of that mode of operation?
Well, sadly, we are not present in Sweden. I wish we were, because that would be really interesting to see the numbers. None of the Scandinavian countries yet, but maybe that's a good opportunity to enter, because we see the resilience. What I personally think, I think, it's always hard to say in the moment. I guess, again, it's easy in hindsight to say, we should have also, stayed open. I think we've seen it first with China. They obviously numbers may be interpretable, but in general, how they dealt with the crisis, they quickly came out of it. So I think it's normal that we follow the same. I think it's nice to have a different model to compare to. So in the future, if for whatever reason a second wave does come, as some industry experts say, I think then we would be better knowing, do we have to again take such stringent measures, or maybe be a bit more liberal while still having certain measures in place, but not complete lockdown. So I think, I'm not a doctor and so on, so I don't have the numbers, what have you, but I think, looking at the numbers, they don't seem to be doing much worse than other countries. So I think if that's any kind of indication, if a second wave comes, I suppose, a lot of other governments will follow maybe a less stringent model as well.
Yes, thank you, Kai. And coming to your business, and it was really interesting to hear the business model discussion and business model innovation. And of course, maybe you can tell a little bit more, because I think it's really interesting for everyone also in our law firm. We are having these discussions now, that we are also, legal business is not the one, we cannot complain. We're not the one the most affected, and we are now actually in high demand because clients need help and so on. But generally, we also understand that the life as it was will never come back. It will be back, will be fine, I'm sure, but in a different way. So this business model discussion is really interesting, and maybe it's also interesting for our viewers to hear a little bit more. How is it going on? How do you see it? And how, of course, without sharing any secrets, how do you conduct it in Kempinski?
Of course. No, I think, obviously it will evolve. We're just now at the start. We kind of put the worst behind us and now looking to the future, how we can adapt to still attract the people. But I think we really have to look across the board. We call the service touch points. Where do we interact with our guests and so on. So people are going to be much more conscious of the health factors, safety and hygiene factors and so on. So we as a company will obviously be introducing soon new standards. It's something we call Kempinski white glove service, which is anyway something we do. Those of you who have been to a hotel, you see in the restaurants, we use our white gloves. So technically we're already ahead of the curve by protecting ourselves and our guests. But that's just standing figuratively to what we intend to do to really safeguard the guests' safety and hygiene measures. Things like once you have a room used, you're not going to resell the same room for 24 hours. But other rooms to disinfect properly and so on. Obviously, these are we have different phases. So some of the phases will not be lasting for 3 years, but most imminent for like 45 days. Then we have 90 days out, 180 days out. So as time goes on and the whole case calms down, obviously some of the measures will be less stringent. Face masks probably. Hopefully by next year, summer, we won't be wearing them anymore. But in the beginning, definitely, I think it's a prerequisite. So certain things will calm down. But again, I think it's also rethinking. We'll be much more, active locally. How do we work? Maybe with co-working spaces, to give certain spaces or rooms for day use and so on, which previously we haven't been done. Food delivery, hotels were traditionally no, we are a hotel, people come to us, this is what we do. Why not to question that as well? We do amazing food. Let's share it with the people who live around us. So I think there's a lot of things that we really have to question and so on. At the same time, we are in the luxury sector. I think, unless, described by the law, but I don't think it's very nice when you come to a 5-star check-in and you greet it by this plexiglass you have now in the REMI, the person with the mask and the other shame and breathing heavy in front of you. So that actually intimidates you even more and makes you scared. We're in the business of making people feel comfortable and relaxed, while still, of course, looking after the measures. So it's a fine line of having these measures, but at the same time delivering them in an elegant way. So this is where we're now working out plans to make sure people feel comfortable and know that they are looked after. But at the same time, make it, of course, elegant and in a luxury environment.
Yeah, thank you, Kai. So generally now, I heard yesterday from the government that they are planning actually reopening the airspace and starting to reopen the borders, and maybe I even heard that the flight to Frankfurt should be restored somewhere after May 11. When are you planning to reopen? I'm asking partly because I know people would love to visit, including me. We would like to visit your restaurant again sometime.
Well, that's very good to hear, and definitely we'll be first to know once we do plan to open. Again, it's probably going to be in certain phases. So most likely starting locally with the terrace, maybe the restaurants, etc. This definitely as a first step, because again, we need to have a critical numbers of guests to justify running an entire hotel. If one flight once a day or twice a week comes, that's nice and it's good momentum. Again, I think these impulses are important, but we need a certain volume, because if every hotel opens, you have so much supply out there for very, very little number of tourists. Locally, of course, a lot of the domestic travel, especially in summer, is pushed to the countryside, to the seaside. We don't see too many people who do what we call city escapes. We hope more, and I think we're going to be working on some cool creative packages to really make sure that people maybe also look to escape in their own city, because it's something new to stay, in the city you live, but in a different perspective. So again, we're looking closely of the traffic coming in, and I think a lot again goes back to uncertainty, or in that case clarity, or feeling comfortable to travel. How are the businesses coming back? Are they going to come back, or are they going to continue conducting their business via Zoom calls? Definitely more of that will happen, but some critical business will still come back. Big events and banqueting, catering, of course, we don't even plan much for this year, at least not internationally. It will be mostly, if at all, allowed locally. So, it's really, we go week by week to evaluate the numbers. We hope sooner than later. Is it going to be May? Unlikely, to be honest, but sometime June, July for sure. That's when we want to reopen. But the terrace beforehand, but we'll make sure to make some noise around it once we do.
Okay, great. Okay, so when you had some good words for the Lithuanian government, and of course, I don't know if you are not in the SME sector, and probably you are generally a big international business, but do you think something more could be done from your perspective as your business, but also the foreign investor perspective? Maybe you have some advice for the government, because you see the government is following actually our broadcast, as Vytautas has shown. So and it's great actually that they are listening to the market. So maybe you have some suggestions.
Definitely. Again, it's always easy to pinpoint and say what they should be doing. And it's even hard to compare to when I look at Germany. Definitely, I understand they have more reserves and more, money that they can put out as stimulus package. So yes, when I speak to my colleagues in Germany, Switzerland, most of them are on 80% payroll. So they're still working all in the hotel, even no guests, but doing deep cleaning, they're doing nice initiatives. I would love to do this, to have all our people here, not to have to worry about any layoffs whatsoever. Everybody 80%, you will be more than happy, and that's fine. I understand that financially that's just not possible. So I think that's it's just a matter of running the numbers. One thing I think, two things. I think one is I think the initial reaction was quite fast. The payouts, it's subjective, but I think it could be nice if it was done faster. We tried to be as fast as possible to apply. I think we got it, in my opinion, fairly late if I compare to Germany. So there, you applied, and literally within a week later, they had it, the sort of Invega alternatives and so on. So that was very swift. Sometimes also, I must say, too swift. So we had a lot of cases now with fraud there. So, if you don't check too much, a lot of abuse happened there. So maybe in that way, Lithuania is a bit more critical to look at these things. So I also understand that. But really, we can't complain. It could have been faster, yes, but overall, they already paid. So that's nice to see. But for us, most importantly, I think as a second step, to definitely not end these payments with the end of quarantine and lockdown, but really, ideally, end of the year, I think, to get us through this year and just tick it off and then have a fresh start in 2021. By that time, you can also really look at your organizational structure, how you can restructure certain departments. We do the same, do we really need all these structures, or we combine certain things not just eliminate, but to synergize. Maybe it's time to, invest more into digital. Let's have more people in digital and less in, manual certain things. So that's something we're going through now. So, if you cut the payment immediately, then you're forced to do immediate reaction, which sometimes may trigger, again, an exodus, which shouldn't be happening, rather than a phased out revisiting of the organizational chart. That's what I would say. But I must also say, sorry if I can just add one more comment. I was, I think last week on the American Chamber of Commerce call, and there was also or Swedish Chamber, I forgot one of those. There was also the Vice Minister of Economy and Innovation, and I really liked, as Vytautas said, I mean, he was also really listening to people from the industry, engaging, taking notes, and he actually said back then, he said he will very much push for an extension, especially for those industries very hard hit, to go beyond. And as it turns out, as he showed, it looks promising. So I really like that they're very close to the people, listening and executing against it. So that's nice to see.
Okay, so the last question from my side, and you are in the business community, in the foreign investor community, and of course now the communication is restricted on the one hand, but on the other hand, we all spend our days before the screens, and we actually talk to people sometimes even more, at least in my experience. So how do you feel the sentiment? And maybe you, first of all, and second, maybe you have some advice. I mean, some people are in the bigger businesses, others are in smaller businesses, others have their personal businesses here. What would be your few words for the foreign investor community?
Like overall the sentiment, how the future is going to look, or how I feel about it?
Yes, how do you feel that, I mean, do they feel taken care of, or do they feel that they lack some information or some attention from the government, and what is your advice?
Of course. I mean, quite frankly, I think there's people who always criticize everything, right? I mean, you can do whatever you want. I mean, can you imagine there are even people who criticize Kempinski? I mean, what's wrong with people? But, I think those people who are generally negative and criticize things in these times will just further find reasons why the world is wrong, right? But then again, I think a lot of people are seeing now also opportunities. And as I said, I mean, in the last financial crisis, companies like Airbnb, Uber, and so on, a lot of great companies were formed. So again, I think every challenge provides opportunity, and that's what's said for us also. Rather than seeing how bad the situation is, let's revisit our business model to be future-proof. And I think what I hear from companies, yes, they're going through the motions, they're having a tough time, but I think it really asks, because if times are good and you grow every year 5, 10, 15%, you're not going to really ask the question, do we need to change anything? But now you really have the mirror in front of you. You have to really take a close look and understand that you have to change, otherwise you're going to be changed. So I think that there is a certain hope and benefit in it, and I feel a lot of people are seeing this positive, as do I. Yes, you shouldn't be overly optimistic and just believe the future is going to be bright for no reason. It's going to be a long time. It's not going to mysteriously end this year even. I think it will go well into next year. I mean, for us, the earliest real rebound we'll see probably summer next year, I suppose. But again, being overly pessimistic and speaking with your employees and being depressed about the situation doesn't do anybody a favor. Not yourself. You as a leader, you have to still, inspire people and show that there is a way forward. So I think, a positive, realistic outlook, I think, is the best, and really make the most out of it. Question everything and see what you can do to improve yourself, rather than betting on the government or no other circumstance. It's a global phenomenon. We're all on the same page in a way that gives me calmness. So it's not that we in Lithuania did something wrong or I did mismanage the hotel. We're all in it together. So I think if you find little rooms to do things different than your competitor or somebody else, you can immediately stand out, And for me, I mean, such a beautiful thing yesterday, what came out with Vilius, what they've done, this initiative about opening this cafes, turning it into a global, citywide open air cafe. I mean, on CNN, it reached globally. I had people from the US writing me, from China. It was such a viral hit. By doing such a small thing, it really put Vilnius on the map. And I think we all can do our part in it, and by doing small little initiatives, gestures, can go a long way and can really put you ahead of competition.
Thank you, Kai. Yeah, I really loved also this Vilnius initiative, especially, you know, it's so brave for a city, a capital which probably has more rain than most other capitals in the world.
Yes.
But it's really beautiful. Yeah, I'm looking forward to going there this weekend and checking those cafes. Okay, we have now some questions, and Kai, we will come back also to questions to you.
Sure.
But now we have a question from Rimgaudas, and it is directed to Eglė. And the question reads: what are the limitations of the companies applying for loans using measures Soviete and Alternativa? I.e., is the same requirement not to be treated as experiencing difficulties by the end of 2019 applied? Eglė, could you take this?
Yes, of course. So, yes, at the moment, these requirements still apply, and you have to present the accountants, and you have to be you don't have to be the company in difficulties. So yes.
And so maybe I can continue on the same line, because I also had a question on this in this regard. So okay, so if a business finds itself that it doesn't meet some of these requirements and some of these, is it a kind of the end of story, or something can be done? Can there be some, I don't know, creative ways of course, I mean, I appreciate that if you have objective financial situation, not much can be changed, but maybe some other requirements are more kind of formal. So what would you advise, Eglė, for businesses who see that they are kind of not fully in the list?
Actually, at the moment, the regulations are very strict. And if you do not fall under all the conditions listed by Enviga, you are not available to apply for this measure. So let's hope the Aid for Business Fund will be a measure without such big restrictions. And let's hope we can use this measure by the businesses who cannot apply for the measures at the moment.
Okay, yeah, so because it's, of course, I mean, it makes it, these restrictions and requirements, they make it, the availability, of course, much more limited. One more question to you, Eglė, is for moratorium of the loans. So this is, I understand, an initiative by the banks, and how can this be utilized? Maybe you can tell us how is there some rules for applying, or if not, what is the advice? How do we use it?
So the rules I listed quickly. So there shouldn't be significant delays in payments to financial institution, no insolvency restructuring, and the equity capital is positive. And if you fall under these requirements, you have to apply the financial institution, you have a loan or you have a leasing, and the payment moratorium will be applicable then to you.
Robert, I have a question for you from tax side, and especially these tax loans, and they are, of course, really helpful and efficient measure, but also thinking, generally from business management perspective. So it doesn't mean that you don't have to pay the taxes. So if you defer them, you kind of pile up the difficulty for later. So can you maybe reiterate for how long these tax loans can be taken out and how they can kind of be a longer term measure? Because if it's just several months, that means the next year is going to be really hard to pay taxes for 2 years.
Yes, Vilius, a good point, actually. The thing that the tax payment is postponed does not mean that the tax debt is forgiven. So for sure that if you have some sort of postponement, then we are talking about deferred taxes in the financial accounts of a particular company. And as I was talking, that tax break is given originally for the period of quarantine and then for 2 months. And if nothing is further done and no application is filed for the tax loan, then it means after these 2 months, immediately you have the amount payable of the taxes that accumulated over that period. And that could be substantial, knowing that, probably all the circumstances and implications of COVID pandemic will not disappear. So this is really something to consider for the businesses and to make medium-term planning as well, and then longer-term planning how to settle these debts once they are due. In terms of if the company decides to avail from the tax loan, so as I mentioned, the maximum term is 4 years, but that should not be taken for granted. The tax authorities will be looking quite, I would assume at that time, carefully, and will not be giving away such long period so easily. So this is something where the taxpayers have to calculate and to have some substantiation of why and for how long they are going to ask for this postponement.
Yeah, Robert, but so maybe, since we know that the government is listening, maybe we have some also a suggestion here for kind of improvement, because really, to me, the tax deferment and tax relief measures have been really the most effective, because they are kind of coming into effect the moment you announce them. And they're giving a lot of this very short-term comfort, and a lot of businesses have benefited from short-term liquidity relief in that respect. But the longer term, now we need to think longer term. And as Kai said, and it's not only hotel industry, every industry, I think, or most industries will be feeling this until the end of the year and for the best part of 2021. So maybe, I don't know, maybe using examples of other countries, or do we have some insights here for the government?
Well, I would say it is important, again, that we do not create bureaucratic mechanism where, something which is nice written on the paper does not really implementable in real life. So, of course, it is important that procedures are smooth. And once we have these 2 months passed, the companies that are still in trouble, they're really capable of obtaining these tax loans. For a while, as we see the rules now, it does not seem so complicated. As I mentioned, no additional documents are required, but I think we also heard something in the media that some companies were checked by the authorities and the police, checking if all the documents in place, and that's probably there was a reasonable ground to do that. But the thing is that we should not create the measures where we, with one hand, is giving them, but with the other hand, we're trying to, in a way, to take them back. So it is very important that the message which is coming from the government and the tax authorities is very clear, that they want to help the businesses to survive, because businesses are ultimately who is creating employment and all the welfare around. So as I mentioned, it is clear that there should be no bureaucracy, there should be a very streamlined approach. And let's hope that it will remain as it was. There was some, by the way, in the beginning, when just these tax breaks were announced, there was some hesitations and then some uncertainties in the rules. So this is where, again, clear message, no going forward and backwards. There should be very uniform, clear messages. And if we look, let's say, just very shortly to the examples of other countries and in general, what was the recommendations for tax administrations coming from OECD. So one of the key, let's say, items was that, the tax authorities must be really, focusing on really issuing all the explanations and information and helping the taxpayers in this period. and what they were also encouraging to stop any tax audits, which is not the case, unfortunately, here in Lithuania right now. So there is some way of improvement. I mean, I believe a lot of is done at this point of time, but I think we have the common goal, and that should be an understanding at all the levels of the government, and also at the side of the business, that it is probably the overall effect would be better if we focus on how to move through this period rather than to create some hurdles and try to set up unnecessary rules when ultimately we see that there is a lack of resources at the authorities, and everything fails and nobody's happy.
Thank you, Robert. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, as Kai mentioned, uncertainty is the biggest killer. I mean, the business needs to be certain about the future in order to keep investing in the wages and in the salaries and in the contracts, and to keep economy going. So the more certainty that the state can create, even if risking mistakes, even if risking somebody will abuse it, the better. Vytautas, you wanted to add something about creativity in interpreting the rules and restrictions.
Yeah, I just wanted to mention that there are interesting ways, and we can always see how to creatively read the law. For example, yesterday in the evening, I've discussed with the client that SME, there's a requirement for small and medium businesses of 250 employees, which Eglė mentioned, right? So, but how we calculate them? And we discussed that probably we can calculate by the positions, full positions, because the client had more than this amount of persons, more people, but less positions, because most of the people were working half-time or even less. So there's always a catch, there's always a creative way to find the solution and to look how we could probably apply and find a way to get the subsidies.
Yeah, so this is also encouragement, that if we don't see like exactly on paper that we are meeting, maybe it's good to pick up the phone or pick up the Zoom, we should say nowadays, and discuss with some of our colleagues or somebody you trust, and see what ways there are, because there might be some ways. Okay, so the time flies, and we have only a few minutes left. So maybe, Kai, I would like to return to you, and based on what we discussed, maybe you have some further thoughts or further ideas you would like to share.
I mean, I think a lot of good content was shared. I agree with all of it, basically. And also, like you said, I mean, these things are so dynamic, changing a lot. So as you said, there's a lot of room for interpretation. Get creative, look at ways, challenge them, not because they stand like this. A lot of things are open to be discussed and interpreted. Of course, you want to follow the law. There's no question about it. But I think these are the times when you have to be really close to your lawyers, to the lawmakers, and to try to understand what is the best way. Because again, we're talking about survival here. These are not nice to have, but kind of must to have things in order to sustain the overall life of the organization. And yeah, I mean, I think other than this, somehow we'll all get through this. The people, for us, we always say people, once they start earning money, they have this desire to travel. You want to see the world. I don't think this is going to stop. It will change. Probably a lot of things will be different than we used to, but I don't think that ultimately people will stop traveling and stop drinking caviar and eating lobster. So with this, we hope that we will do all of this very soon in our beautiful hotel.
Okay. Yeah, so once we survive, we go back to the lobsters.
Exactly.
No, but it's great. I think this, I very much agree and very much appreciate your suggestion, Kai, that we must be optimistic, and we must find a way to go forward. And this is not only about, as also Kai mentioned, the health crisis is becoming economic crisis, and maybe it's not in the spotlight yet, but it's there. Economic crisis is there. And the governments, yes, maybe Germany has more resources than Lithuania, and Lithuania has more resources than many, many countries in the world, and we are lucky to be here, actually. But those resources depend on one thing, depend on the businesses running. And that's the thing, it's a beautiful thing. And also in Vilnius, we have these displays of thank you for the health workers. We need to have those displays of thank you for businesses, because if the businesses are not running, of whatever resources the state has, it will dry out, and it will dry out much sooner than one thinks. So for us to be able to sustain those people who are in need and those people who are sick, other people will have to work, and this is not less heroic, actually. So thank you to all who are listening to us and who are keeping the businesses open or looking forward to businesses open. Thank you very much to the speakers today. This was really exciting for me. This 1.5 hours flew by really fast. And thank you very much, Kai, once again. Thank you for your time. I know you are busy now, and really, your insight were very much appreciated. So we'll be posting this content online, so you can come back to it, and we'll be posting also the presentations online. But if you have any question or if you want something specific, please don't hesitate to write to me or to any of the speakers of TGS Baltic, and we'll do our best to help. Thank you very much, everyone. Have a good long weekend, and let's enjoy the Vilnius outdoor cafes, which are now world famous.
Definitely. Thank you, Vilius. Thank you, everybody. It was great being with you. Have a wonderful day, everybody. Take care.
Take care.